Welcome to A Healer in Every Home. I'm your host, Burke Lenahan, and tonight we have a fascinating show for you with Jerry Kantor, a homeopath and acupuncturist. Jerry has academic credentials, including teaching associate in anesthesiology at Harvard Medical School, and he's also written a number of really interesting books. Tonight we'll be discussing one of them, The Toxic Relationship Cure. But first, Jerry's going to talk to us about the emotional toolkit and how it relates to homeopathy.
Thank you, Bert. We were all born with a toolbox of emotions. It's inborn to us, according to the Chinese, my version of them. Okay. This is the hammer of anger. Okay. The thing about a tool is when you use a tool, it does a job, and then you put it away. That's how it should be. Our emotions are exactly the same way. They should be cathartic. They should solve a problem. If someone has insulted you, hurt your feelings, it's appropriate to be angry for a period of time. Get it off your chest. Be done with it. Then you put your tool away. You put your anger tool away, and that's the hammer of anger. It has a claw end on the other side of it, and we're going to talk about some dysfunctional use of this later on when we're talking about relationships, remedies for relationships.
What's the remedy that has too much anger, and what's the remedy that
Oh,
has...
yeah. Okay, so if you annoy somebody, maybe they'll get mad. But there's some people who you say something nice to them, they're also mad. They can't let go of this hammer of anger. They're overusing it. That would be a remedy like stramonium. Somebody who cannot get mad, or who's using the claw end of this, I call that the dysfunctional cousin of anger, vexation. Mm-hmm. And that in that situation, it's very clear they the anger is not cathartic. They're kind of clawing away at themselves. So after they get angry, they just feel even worse. And as I say, they're using the claw end of the hammer.
Or it can be suppressed anger, which can be so destructive.
Yes, in that case, they're not using their hammer at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Should we take out another tool? Okay, putting it away because I'm done with it, even though I'm not really angry. This is the hacksaw of sadness. Why a hacksaw? Because if we have a grief, if we have a loss, it's appropriate to be sad, it's appropriate to mourn, but there has to be an end to it. At some point, we must cut ourselves off from that so that it doesn't overrule our lives. And there's some remedies like pulsatilla, where someone is crying all the time, but they're very, very peevish. They're really hard to be around, very sympathetic, but it's like they can't let go of this. It's like almost like there's an irritation from the blade of the hacksaw of sadness. They just can't let go of this. The converse of that is a remedy called natrum muriaticum, where someone can't cry, but their feeling is, I'm going to be a very, very good person, a very good girl, so if I do something right, nobody else will get hurt, nobody else will die, highly responsible state. And the feeling there is if I cry, I will cry forever, so I can't have that. Or if I actually get past this grief, that would dishonor the loss. So they never take their hacksaw of sadness out of the toolbox. That's not good. Okay. What do we have here? These are the pliers of fear. You get gripped by fear. You're in the grip of fear. That's appropriate. So if you're in a fearful situation, you should be temporarily gripped by fear just until you can figure out what to do, whether it's run away or fight, for example. If you can't let go of your fear, you're constantly fearful, you're always, you're just gripped by it, that would be a remedy like veratrum album. That's a remedy for someone who feels like the rug has been pulled out from under them in their life. They've lost a privileged position in their lives, maybe from a sibling coming up, supplanting them. Or a big dislocation in geography. Someone who doesn't use the pliers is kind of a dangerous situation. There are remedy states that reflect that too. For example, opium, which is an escapist remedy state where people are famous for having high tolerance for pain and doing reckless things. So that would be.
So they're not facing their fear; they're escaping their fear.
They're escaping their fear. They're not facing it exactly. What have we got over here? Okay. Everybody knows this. We're screwed. Somebody's screwed, right? This is the screwdriver of anxiety. Notice how a screwdriver works. It really hones in on one tiny little place, right? That screw, and you've really got to focus on that. And that's kind of the nature of anxiety or obsessiveness. This is the screwdriver of anxiety, and anxiety is also useful. If you're in the forest and you're starving and you come upon a mushroom, you better darn well be anxious about that mushroom. You're really hungry. Don't gobble the thing. Maybe just use your anxiety to eat a tiny amount of that so you can maybe not die from it if it's poisonous. And if it is good for you, then you get an idea that it's okay. So this is the appropriate use of the screwdriver of anxiety. Arsenicum album is a famous remedy for somebody who's overly anxious. Yes, it's good to be perfectionistic, but you don't want to be perfectionist about everything. On top of having potentially an obsessive disorder, that state really aggravates the stomach. It can infect the mucous membranes and so forth. Somebody who's free of anxiety, I actually can't think of many remedy states where someone has absolutely no anxiety. So most of the time with this tool, it's that people are overusing it as opposed to never having it. So now I'm going to put my toolbox away, and I'll try to refer to remedies that we discussed, maybe in some ways referable to this very simple way of organizing homeopathic remedies.
So now we're going to talk about, in your book, The Toxic Relationship Cure, you have a section for like 5 different types of toxic relationships. And can you just list them for us, and then we'll get examples of one of the types?
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
The Toxic Relationship Cure: clearing traumatic damage from a boss, a parent, a lover, or a friend.
So can you give us some examples of like a toxic parent? Different types of
Toxic
parents.
Yeah, okay. So let's talk about the remedy Saccharum officinale.
Made from white sugar, by the way.
Made from
yes.
white sugar,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Sometimes this happens. These are unfortunate stories, but they're kind of everyday too. Ever encounter or hear about like a parent who's just absolutely clueless? Just absolutely clueless? The baby is crying, and they haven't got the wherewithal to pick the child up. They just let it cry. They just let it cry. Or a little bit later on in life, maybe like a lot of bribery. They trying to control the child's behaviors with bribery, bribing with sugar. This can happen in situations where the parents have divorced,
Mm-hmm.
and one child one parent is very responsible, and the other one feels he's got to become the good guy, and he starts to apply the child with sugar.
Mm-hmm. I see this in my practice a lot. Like, the mom is the one who's feeding the kid tofu and broccoli, and then on weekends the kid goes and spends the weekend with dad and gets McDonald's and ice cream for breakfast.
That's right.
And the other thing is, the child, it's like they're a bottomless pit of neediness, because they're never what they really want is love.
That's right.
They're never getting enough love. But this being an American materialistic society, what they think they need is the iPad and the iPhone. This is like the 5- and 6-year-old, that are getting the designer sneakers that cost $400, and one material thing after another. And as soon as they get that thing, the dad is spending all this money on material objects, and the kid is a bottomless pit of neediness because it's not really what they want.
Right.
They want love.
And this expresses itself in many very significant features. This remedy comes up very big for attention deficit disorder.
Mm-hmm.
These children, understandably, once you get the idea of this, they cannot love themselves. They cannot love themselves because they're not getting any genuine love. So they cannot concentrate. Physically, their skin tends to be dry. They would be prone to tantrums.
And they crave sugar, and of course then they're bribed with sugar, and they get addicted to sugar, and that makes them more hyperactive.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
you
right.
can't
Sugar,
concentrate.
it's 5 cents worth of psychology. Everybody kind of knows it. It's
Yeah.
a cheap substitute for love.
Yeah.
Hey, honey. Hey, sweetie. This comes up a lot, and it's a staple of homeopathic practice
Mm-hmm.
with children, because unfortunately so many children get this inappropriate kind of love, and as a consequence they find that they can't love themselves.
Right, yeah. What about another remedy for another type of toxic parent relationship and an appropriate remedy?
Okay, we can talk about anacardium.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who needs anacardium has a very distinctive polarity. They're cruel, they're hard, they can be really mean. They like contact sports, they like football, hockey, and the polarity there is that they'll feel incredibly helpless on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
How does this happen? In my experience, it has to do with the fact that they have two parents who are so opposite or so demanding that they cannot integrate these two personalities into their psyche.
Mm-hmm.
So this division takes place in them. It's kind of a template almost for the diagnosis of bipolarity. In homeopathy land, we talk about this state as having like a good angel and a bad angel.
Right.
And so they flip-flop between having to be tremendously in control and feeling incredibly helpless. And the torment of that is very, very severe, and it expresses itself in a need to curse. It expresses itself in a need to eat very fast. They need to plug themselves up with food.
So I had a mom who brought a little girl in to see me, and this mom actually whispered to me. She said, "I think my child is possessed by the devil And she said, I hate my child.
Yeah.
And again, the child of a divorce, of parents of very different personalities, and the kid couldn't figure out how to be a human being.
Yeah. Now, in the book, the example I use in my book for this one particular client, and by the way, these are composites. They're
Right.
not any one particular individual.
So they're true to life,
They're true to life.
but there's not one particular person that you might recognize.
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
Yeah.
But they have the written so that they have all the keynotes, the features of the remedy state
Mhm.
for instructional purposes. So in this particular instance, the guy had a pair of parents who were both rageaholics,
Mhm.
hugely controlling, and they wouldn't go to this guy escaped into sports, and he was all, but his parents didn't go see any of his games or anything like that. And then the father died at a very young age, and the mother, who was balanced, whose energy was balanced by the husband, now was completely uncontrolled and made these incredible demands on his life, and he felt very, very disrespected. He would say, she tramples on my mother tramples on my self-respect. If you need a remedy like that, and you're drawn to contact sports,
Yeah.
that might predispose you to needing another remedy like natrum sulfurica, which is very, very good for head injury, which also has the theme of I'm invisible, which you can see comes out of that same
Right.
dynamic.
Right. How about a third remedy for toxic parents?
Okay. I would say the biggest one would be thuja.
Right. Mhm.
Thuja, which is made from tree of life, arbor vitae, grows everywhere. The problem with someone who needs thuja is horrific self-esteem.
Mhm.
They feel like a fraud. And that really comes from having been given conditional love. We don't value you as an individual. We only value you, for example, as what your accomplishments have made of you.
And if you don't accomplish a lot, we don't value you.
Right.
That's the message these kids get.
So there's two dads who go play baseball in the backyard with their son. In the first instance, the dad grabs a glove and a bat and a ball, and they go back to the backyard.
Mhm.
The dad lobs the ball to the son. Son swings, hits a pop-up. Dad says, wow, nice swing, really nice, made good contact with it. I noticed you kept your eye on the ball. Throws the ball again, kid hits a ground ball. Even better contact. It's so much fun to be out here with you. Do you know you had an uncle who played in the minor leagues? Throws the ball again, the kid hits a little fly ball out. Wow, this is tremendous. The second instance is not so good. A different father goes in the backyard with his son, throws the ball to the son. Kid hits the same pop-up. The father says, what the hell was that? What kind of swing was that? Throws the ball again to the son. Kid hits a ground ball. Father says, what, are you trying to kill worms? You're like a spastic. This is horrendous. Throws the ball again. The guy hits a little fly ball. Yeah, pretty lucky. But your swing sucks. This is disgusting. I'm the hell with this. Throws his glove down and goes inside. So let's fast forward a couple of years, and both of these children are playing in the Little League. Okay? So the first child gets up and strikes out. How do you think he feels?
Pretty good. I'll try again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the second child gets up and he knocks the hell out of the ball. He hits it over the fence. How do you think he feels? He thinks he's a fraud. He thinks it was a complete fluke and that he's a fraud.
Right.
So this idea of inauthenticity has
Mhm.
taken hold of this child. And this
Mhm.
has, there's a feeling of inner ugliness, of inner stupidity. And he
Shame
will
and
do
disgust.
shame. He will do
Yeah.
everything in his life to disguise this. So the
Mhm.
people who need this remedy are masters of disguise. They're chameleons.
Mhm.
But the truth of what's going on with them internally has to come out. And this is like a
Mhm.
kind of folk wisdom. They'll be prone to warts, all
Mhm.
inner ugliness coming out in the skin. There's a joke that Groucho Marx used to tell that he would not join a club that would have him as a member. It's funny, but it's also a very, very bitter joke, how poor your self-esteem is.
I use Tuya a lot for teenagers because Tuya is a remedy of, if people could see me the way I really am, they wouldn't like me. So there's something inside me I have to hide. Well, you can imagine for a teenager who's just dealing with the arising impulses of a teenager, that they have this inner feeling of shame and disgust, but then they feel like they have to create an outer persona that's going to be acceptable to people around them. And so they'll observe, like, they want to fit in, they want to conform, they want to see what's the latest fashions that the kids are wearing, what's the latest slang. They kind of study it to try to get it right, but it's not really natural. Like, they don't actually feel natural with it, and they're afraid of being found out. And I can tell when I'm talking to someone who needs Tuya, because I can tell that they don't answer questions spontaneously. I ask them a question, and it's almost like I can see the wheels turning, like they're trying to figure out what's the correct answer. When all I'm asking them is like, what kind of food do you like? There's no correct answer to that. I'm learning about them. but they're kind of assessing the situation. They want to seem normal. They're trying to figure out what's normal in this situation. And because they're putting such energy into creating this acceptable facade, they've given themselves away. And I know they need Tuya.
Yeah.
And like your example of the wart, the other thing they'll get is pimples. And what a teenage problem to have. And it's like their body betrays them. Their body knows there's something they're trying to hide, and their body won't let them get away with it, and their body puts it right out on the surface for everyone to see. I had 4 generations of a Jehovah's Witness family come as clients. It was great, such great clients. So the 16-year-old boy, he had a problem that he was going on his first date. He was going to the prom, and he had a gigantic pimple on his nose. So they brought him in to deal with the pimple. And so in talking to him, I guessed that he needed Tuya, and I guessed that he had something to hide, that here he is in this pretty conservative church community, with pretty prudish attitude towards teenagers dating. It was actually a very controlled situation. And so I gave him Tuya to help him to integrate more and accept himself more. And I also just gave him a little pep talk, which I thought he probably hadn't gotten from any of his family or church members, about what's normal and what's totally okay for a 16-year-old boy to be feeling like you're really okay, you're a human being, just to make him feel better about himself.
Well, what you talk about the wheels turning,
Mm-hmm.
the term I sometimes use for that is mental gymnastics.
Mm-hmm.
So people who need that, they'll want to be anybody other than themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody. They cannot access their self-interest, and they make terrible decisions. And their mental and all that, but all that energy that someone who doesn't need that remedy has just feels his gut. Is this person good for me? Is this a good idea?
Right.
All that energy goes into this overthinking. And one of my prime examples of that is the kid who was brought to me because he was convinced he was a robot.
Mm-hmm.
Came as, and I know I from the case history, everybody tried to argue him out of it. No, you're not a robot. Darn it, you're not. You're a boy. Nothing worked. You'll be defeated. And I asked what was the history of this, and he was taking a class in biology, and he was learning about Darwin. And in Darwinian philosophy, you don't have much individuality. You're the victim of your environment, and this is what comes out.
And random gene mutations.
Yeah, so he grabbed onto this idea, and I know that, of course, this was just the surface of it. He must have been disrespected early on, various things that hurt his self-esteem early on that made him susceptible to this. But what I said to him was, I was not my first rodeo. I was not going to engage with him in convincing him this, plus it's not my job. I said, it's okay, it's fine, I've treated many robots before. It's not going to be a problem. And sure enough, I gave Thuja. And the thing is about it, because there's so much pain in that history, the Thuja states is like an insulating layer that insulates you from the pain of having had your psyche destroyed early on. So when you peel that away with a remedy, something more authentic, but grief comes forward. And then you get to treat that with a subsequent remedy, like natrum sulfurica or something like that.
Yeah, so you had the example of, like, the warts, like the time in American society that was the most conformist and the most emotionally suppressed and the most concerned with everybody, kind of the white picket fence, suburban, leave it to Beaver version of American society.
The 1950s in America. And it's absolutely true to me. I mean, that a remedy state can infect an entire population. So after World War II, the United States had won the war to end all wars. The economy was booming. Everything was going great. We defeated this great monster. We're never going to have to deal with this kind of stuff again. And then one day we woke up and learned, oh my God, we have a new enemy. And the new enemy has the atomic bomb. And the 1950s erupted, which was just like what you were saying, full of shame and secrecy and guilt and conformism, buried racism. It was a very, very inauthentic time. Now in homeopathy, after we give Thuja, very often another remedy comes up that it's its complement, which is Medorrhinum, which is all about recklessness, sex, drugs, rock and roll. Many of the same physical symptoms, but this eruption of resolution of all the suppression. And what happened after the 50s? We entered into an era of Medorrhinum.
Right, sex, drugs, rock
Sex,
and roll.
drugs, rock, the 1960s. So societal changes can follow exactly along the lines of a change that can occur in an individual in terms of homeopathic successions.
So Jerry, what I'm noticing is that you've given us a number of different examples of the toxic parent resulting in different types of ways that the child is going to deal with it and different remedies. And that brings us to the idea of susceptibility in homeopathy. You can have different people in the same situation. You can have 5 kids in the same family having different experiences of the same toxic parent and
Yeah.
needing different remedies.
That's right. Yeah, I have a good example of that. It's a little like germ theory too. We know, notice if when an epidemic goes through a neighborhood, right, not everybody gets the same condition exactly the same level. Some get very sick, some get moderately, some get nothing
Some people
at all.
don't get sick, right.
So that's the problem with germ theory. We believe in it. We certainly know that there are germs. But on the other side of the equation is our susceptibility, our inner terrain. The example I was thinking about was I was watching a TV documentary about 5 identical quintuplets, all boys, lived together. They were like 5 or 6 years old. They ate exactly the same food. They were
Same environment.
same environment, no
Yeah.
difference. And then 9/11 came along, and one of them was, there was some variation among them, you know, that you would notice because you've got to tell them apart. But one of them was a little bit more sensitive than the other ones and more poetic and had a little bit more of an emotional nature. And around the time of 9/11, after the 9/11 event, he came down with a severe stomach problem. And parents took him to the doctor, and the doctor did some tests and said, "Oh, parasites. He's got parasites. We got to get rid of these parasites." And I'm sitting back there saying, "Wow, somebody actually made a homeopathy movie here." Next thing they're going to say, they're going to explain that here we see these are 5 identical kids, but this one got parasites. We know that's impossible. We know that's impossible.
Right.
No, it was his emotional temperament that made him susceptible to this, and that's why he got this. They all had the same bioflora, but that didn't happen, of course. He was just accepted. Well, he got parasites, the other ones didn't. That's not very easy to believe.
Right. So it's an example of a diagnosis. It's not an explanation. It doesn't help us understand what's going on to say he got parasites.
Right.
But he was the most emotionally traumatized by 9/11, and he
That's
was
right.
like his system was weakened. And we always say in homeopathy, you don't need to give a remedy for parasites. You give a remedy to strengthen the person overall, and the organism just sheds the parasites.
Yeah.
So, and I actually had a client who, it wasn't my client, but a friend of hers who had a very unique reaction to 9/11. This person was a structural engineer who visited the Twin Towers the day before and put his hand on the building and said, "I wonder if these would hold up if a plane flew into them." And then when it happened, he said he thought it was his fault.
Yeah.
He thought that his thought had created the problem. So he felt tremendously guilty. So again, a very unique reaction to a universal trauma. Everybody was traumatized, but in some different ways.
Yeah.
So another way to look at these cases is low self-esteem. All of these kids that you're talking about are experiencing low self-esteem in different ways, and we've seen a lot of different remedies for low self-esteem.